The sense of being a unique, separate, individual self emerges in early childhood. Through personal development and new experiences, our self-concept, understanding, and beliefs evolve as we try to make sense of who we are and the world in which we live. On close observation, we find that the nature of the self is extremely complex. As the poet Walt Whitman wrote in Song of Myself, "I contain multitudes." We glimpse one side of the self when rigidly held beliefs and territorial disputes evolve into international conflicts. But we see very different sides of the self expressed through literature, poetry, and music. The public expressions of spiritual feelings and the creation of sacred spaces and ritual behavior. We encounter the multifaceted self in dreams and myths and emotional or distressed states of mind portrayed in art. The self also shows its logical, analytic, creative side in, for example, the speculations and formulations of Freud, Darwin, and Einstein. Formulations that challenged long-held beliefs about who we are, the nature of existence, and our place in the universe. To explore some of the processes in which the self changes and changes the world, I will draw on a number of my personal experiences. To do this, I will use two methods widely employed in psychological research. The first involves a long-term study of subjective mental processes, experiences, and associated behaviors. The second is phenomenology. Phenomenology has been defined as the science of observing or describing phenomena, and as a philosophy concerned with the subjective experiences of the self. It attempts to describe the phenomena of living experience before it is overlaid by culturally conditioned thinking and theories. Apart from being concerned with the subjective experiences of the self, phenomenology is equally about the world in which experience occurs and the where, when, and how behavioral change takes place. Interrelations between the self, experience, behavioral responses, and the external world will be central themes of this presentation. To support my personal observations, methodology, and interpretations, I will reference relevant research from psychology, neuroscience, and anthropology. I will start with my early experience of school, where I did poorly and failed the 11+. As a result, with little or no belief in my abilities, I left school at 15 to work as a wool sorter. In my early 20s, however, I wondered if, by hard work, I could do better. As a test, more in hope than expectation, I took evening classes and eventually gained mature age entry to university. There, I majored in philosophy and psychology, did a fourth-year honours degree in psychology, followed by postgraduate training in clinical psychology. In the process, a core belief about my low academic ability was changed through new experiences and academic achievements. Just before starting university, I also came across a book on a subject I had not heard of before. Reading The Way of Zen made me realize just how limited my Western way of thinking was in truly making sense of myself and the world. Here was a totally different way of thinking about the nature of existence. Zen originated in an ancient form of Chinese Buddhism known as Shen. Unlike other forms of Buddhism, Shen was unique in being strongly influenced by Taoist philosophy, with its emphasis on oneness, or the union of opposites, and the concept of the way. In Taoism, the way is seen as a universal, interrelated process of harmony and oneness, which exists within the natural world and is considered the path that all humans should follow. According to Zen, to fully understand and follow the way, the mind must free itself from a number of developmental and culturally conditioned beliefs. To do this, Zen Buddhists practice long periods of sitting and walking meditation, as well as observation of the self while engaged in daily activities. The 13th century Zen master Dogen summarized the first step in the way of Zen as follows: "The study of the way is the study of the self." During my 6 years training in psychology, I had many opportunities to study the self. One particular influence in my clinical training involved group sessions with a psychotherapist known for his unconventional approaches. He placed particular emphasis on the therapist and the patient learning to follow the feeling, tapping into physical sensations centered around the solar plexus. In one group discussion, the topic aroused in me a feeling of being trapped, and when I mentioned this, he immediately replied, "I've just the thing for you." Standing up to reach behind a filing cabinet, he pulled out a large axe handle. He asked me to stand and close my eyes while we both held the axe handle across my chest. I then had to shout, "Let me out! Let me out!" while he forcibly pushed me against the wall. This provoked an instant rush of anxiety and vivid images regressing backward in time. The first image came from a frightening initiation at work when I was buried in a huge vat of wool, unable to move or breathe. The next was a recurring childhood nightmare where I'm pulled into a bottomless black pit by a suffocating monster. The nightmare was associated with Moaning Minnie, the eerie air raid siren that sounded throughout my first 3 years of life. The final image was surprisingly positive. I'm in the house where I was born and lived until the end of the war. I'm sitting in the kitchen inside a tiny open cupboard, hugging my knees, feeling safe and at one with the world. Age 30, I began dual careers as a clinical psychologist and artist. My clinical work involved helping people change thoughts and behaviors that kept them trapped in cycles of negativity. In art, I attended adult education evening classes specializing in sculpture. There, I explored themes of oneness and personal change, shown here in 2 of my first attempts at stone carvings. With the completion of this figure, I conceived it transforming into an Earth Mother who gives birth to an androgynous child that grows to adulthood, divides, and completes a circle of figures I called the myth of being. Shortly after starting the circle of figures, a sudden end of a romantic relationship triggered in me an emotional loss of deeply valued beliefs about life and relationships. The 14th century poet Geoffrey Chaucer, in just 2 lines of Middle English, captures feelings and questions raised by loss of meaningful beliefs. What is the world? What asketh men to have? Now with his love, now in his cold grave. During a major crisis of personal belief in 1897, the artist Paul Gauguin summed up the thoughts troubling his mind with a large, complex painting he entitled, "Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?" Asking similar questions, I found my circle of figures no longer reflected the inner chaos I was feeling. Intuitively, I attempted to resolve this the only way I knew. Having already carved a figure of a half-child, half-woman, the changeling, I now pictured her inside the circle with other figures facing difficult life changes, and standing with effigies that symbolized distressed or conflicted states of mind. Still feeling mentally unmoored and in need of something positive to anchor myself, I conceived a new sculpture to be placed at the center. My strategies of following the feeling and making sculpture were crucial steps in not losing my way. They helped me stay grounded mentally, to process the experience positively, and to find new meaning and purpose in life. They also illustrate the way intuition and creativity play an important role in resolving a crisis of belief. Parallels can be seen between a personal crisis of belief and rites of passage that date back to Stone Age cultures. These particular ceremonies are designed to create a crisis of belief in order to help individuals change ill-formed concepts about themselves, their culture, and the nature of their world. During a rite of passage, it is common to experience a loss of long-held beliefs, disorientation, confusion, and terror, as well as a quest for resolution. In the process, the initiate undergoes a dramatic, emotionally distressing, and often physically painful ordeal. This is designed to teach and instill important, new, existential, and spiritual beliefs. Through this process, the initiate travels a winding, difficult journey from one state of being to another. They encounter and have to pass powerful manifestations from the spirit world, shown here as a strange, bird-like standing figure. In making this challenging spiritual journey, they learn about their true nature and the nature of existence. The myths and stories of early cultures commonly describe a journey from and a need to return to their source of being. For example, the Australian Aboriginal origin or Dreamtime stories show the world, their tribe, and all other living creatures originating from the creative center of an expanding circle. Here we see the circle expanding in real time and showing the path from and back to the creative source. My own crisis of belief and quest for new meaning manifested in vivid, frequently recurring dreams that unearthed a dynamic, mostly hidden side of myself, the largely visual and dramatic world of the creative unconscious. For some years I kept a dream diary. After that difficult breakup, I frequently dreamed of making a dangerous journey. For example, in the first week, I dreamt of trying to get somewhere important through a maze of locked rooms. I arrive at a beach from which I can swim to another shore. However, before entering the water, it's disturbed by a terrifying black serpent. In the next of the series, a monster emerges from a black pool on the beach and attacks me. In 3 final dreams, I'm out in the water, dive to the seabed, retrieve a beautiful figurine, and swim to the other shore. In the last dream, I'm caught up in a joyous celebration. In another example of the recurring dreams, I start climbing a high mountain, then realize I'm not equipped for the challenge. However, in later dreams, I slowly but finally ascend to the summit. A notable feature of dreams at this time was also recurring images of harmony and centering. One particularly powerful example is half waking 3 times, arms and legs outspread with a powerful force holding me physically in position. Each time I wake, a voice in my head is saying, "The center is very near," or "I must stay near the center." As the crisis resolved itself, I was surprised to start dreaming of gradually gaining the power of flight. This symbol of transcendence and renewal is mostly depicted in dreams and myth as a bird or a birdman. Here, a Native American birdman performs a celebratory ceremonial dance. And in this ancient pictograph from Easter Island, a crouching birdman illustrates the union of opposites, rebirth and transcendence. The engraving records an important public event. When spring came, young men swam a challenging stretch of water to an offshore island where seabirds nested. The first man to return safely with an egg was elected Birdman of the Year. In this photograph of a Krakautal tribal totem, the thunderbird is seen transcending negative and threatening forces perched on the head of a legendary ogress. The birdman also represents the transition from one state of being to another. For example, here the birdman crosses the water and leads the chieftain to his bride in order to complete the union of opposites in marriage. As my crisis of meaning resolved, there were dramatic changes in my approach to art, and a further adventure in self-discovery began with a performance artwork I called Associations to a Dream Symbol. This was first performed in 1975 and again for a psychology workshop at a London psychiatric hospital in 1976, this time accompanied by a video and followed by a lecture and discussion. The video follows me walking through Hampton Court Maze to the centre. In another scene, I fly a kite depicting an image of a Vitruvian man. In the final scene, I sit hugging my knees and open my mouth to reveal a golden circle. The same year at Delphi, the site the Greeks considered the navel of the world and dedicated to the Earth Mother, I held aloft a symbol of birth and rebirth, walked in a spiral toward the centre, illustrated harmony and oneness in the form of a Vitruvian Man, represented rebirth and return to the everyday world. In the following year, I made Heaven and Hell Hopscotch Spiral, a recreation of an ancient children's game of hopscotch, where the player has to jump over hell in order to enter heaven. The first spring rite, in which the reborn birdman spirals out from a symbolic tree of life, a midsummer ceremony, and Earth's Other Garden for Rose Garrard's exhibition at the Acme Gallery in London. Explorations in performance and public art continued through the 1970s, 80s and 90s. For example, on a trip to Tasmania in 1982, I created 2 public art works. The first was called Flight, Ascent, Splash, Center, Ripple, Circle. The second work involved creating a circle on a sandy beach to represent the unique world of the Tasmanian Aborigines that was destroyed by incoming waves of colonial settlers. When I began using performance art, my intention was simply to use another artistic medium to communicate my experiences and interests. However, I quickly saw how closely this medium echoed the rituals and ceremonies that universally accompanied myths and spiritual practices across world cultures. In relation to this, I noticed that during some performances, I experienced a strange sensation of time no longer existing, of being only in the present moment and in a new connection with the wider world. In the past, I had experienced something similar. Once, when I was about 8, I found myself alone in a large, unfamiliar, wooded estate as I searched for something I'd thrown. With my attention entirely focused on my surroundings, I had a sudden realization. I wasn't separate from the world. I was part of the world. Another time was in my early 30s in the Museum of Modern Art in Paris, walking through a recreation of Constantine Brancusi's studio. Passing between his sculptures, my attention became focused on the harmonious interrelation between movement, form, and space. Entering an adjoining room containing similar abstract sculptures, I experienced a feeling of no longer being my normal self, of entering a transcendent relationship with the world. Although still aware of walking, the dimensions of space and time seemed no longer to exist, and there was a strange sensation of weightlessness, as though floating a few inches above the ground. What these experiences have in common is a shift from normal, everyday, self-centered consciousness, while in a highly concentrated, holistic reconnection with the world. In 2024, the anthropologist and neuroscientist Dimitris Tsigalatas published the results of 2 decades studying rituals throughout the world. He concludes that rituals provide a sense of connection and unity and address fundamental human needs. He quotes Larry Harvey, co-founder of the annual Burning Man ceremony, saying that rituals meet the desire to belong to a place, to a time, to belong to one another, and to belong to something greater than ourselves, even in the midst of impermanence. I have also come to believe that such shifts in conscious awareness have particular relevance to fully understanding the true nature of the self. In 1983, as another way of documenting my performance art, I began exploring the medium of photocollage. Here we see my world turning upside down as I enter an inner world of change, self-devouring monsters, darkness, and light. And this attempts to show the relation of the performance art to the traditional art, myths, and public ceremonies of different cultures. However, the earlier mentioned 1982 artwork, illustrating the genocide of Tasmanian Aborigines, and this photo collage, shown in 1985 at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, reflect changes at this time to do with a growing focus on the way the self is related to social, cultural, and environmental concerns. For example, a photo collage series, Man and His World, made during the 1980s, illustrates the dangers of rigidly holding polarized beliefs. Taken together, the titles in the series illustrate a process during which polarized thinking creates division, and a spiral of reactive, aggressive behavior leads to worshipping Lord of the Flies, international conflict, environmental pollution, making instruments of self-destruction, and a world of breathing masks and cemeteries. This process may also be caused by other psychological factors, such as fear and fanaticism, and the desire for power and control. But polarized thinking always plays a part in not fully understanding a situation and limiting solutions to complex problems. It is now broadly recognized that the human mindset and worldwide activities are the main cause of current climate change and, as illustrated, our propensity toward our own and environmental destruction is enormous. A major part of reversing this trend requires a shift to more inclusive, interconnected forms of thinking. For example, consider the importance of access to fresh water. Only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh. 2/3 is frozen in snow and ice, with glaciers holding the largest reserve. Increased atmospheric CO2 raises temperatures in high terrains that cause rapid ice melt, landslides, and the destruction of life, shelter, and habitat. In polar regions, melting ice mostly runs into the sea, becoming a major cause of rising sea levels. Colder seas, combined with atmospheric warming, have an impact on weather patterns. Changing weather patterns create inconsistent rainfall, either too little or too much. The headline with this picture was, "Flash floods leave 71 dead. Fears of waterborne disease rise." In 2021, even London was hit by torrential rain and flash flooding. In the summer of 2025, the major world cities experienced a 25% rise in extremely hot days compared to the 1990s. Warming temperatures have increased wildfires. The latest research confirms that wildfires have become more widespread around the world and now burn twice as much tree cover as they did 2 decades ago. In 2024, fires worldwide burned 13.5 million hectares, an area roughly the size of Greece, and are now emerging as the top driver of forest loss. The impact of wildfires not only increases deforestation and the release of CO2, it causes loss of homes, lives, crops, jobs, and animal habitat. The evolution of the human brain has made us so powerful and influential that our thoughts and actions now determine the fate of the world and all living creatures. How we think and what we do decides whether we become the caretakers or destroyers of worlds. There is a pressing need to think and act in ways that renew our relation with the world. In 1992, my combined interest in performance art and environmental change brought an invitation to join Platform, an interdisciplinary group of artists and environmentalists using public actions to re-establish our relation with nature and the city. Their work at that time, entitled Still Waters, focused on 4 lost rivers of London. Working with artist Nick Stewart, we created several public events which drew attention to the lost river Walbrook, now reduced to a storm drain 30 feet below street level. In one event, I collected water trickling into the Thames from the storm drain and, in an act of ritual cleansing, distilled it at the Walbrook's approximate source beside Liverpool Street Station during the evening rush hour. During one public action, we walked the length of the Walbrook while I carried 2 flasks, one with black drain water, the other with distilled water, and Nick dressed in a shroud made from the London telephone directory. On another occasion, Nick used the water at one site over the Lost River, while I semaphored an SOS on Walbrook Street, where part of the river once ran to the Thames. Because the Walbrook once ran under the City of London's financial centre, at times flooding the vaults of the Bank of England, I gave out my business card to passing pedestrians. It read, "Listen. You are walking on the River Walbrook. Listen." During this presentation, I introduced some of the experiential and behavioral phenomena connected with the complex and multifaceted world of the self. I then described a number of my personal and behavioral changes during a long-term study of the self and creative expression through art. Following this, I explored the personal, social, and existential value of moving from a self-centered to a more holistic form of awareness we can call self-world oneness or world-centered consciousness. The myth of being began with this image of a child in a state of oneness with the world. It then appeared throughout the following artwork: Dreaming within the circle, Being within a world, Birth of Lao Tzu from nature, The newborn, and the beatific sandboy. This child becomes the companion of the Birdman, who overcomes adversity and holds the key to transformative rebirth and meaning. Similarly, images of oneness or a union of opposites occur throughout: the changeling, half-child, half-woman, various androgynous or double-faced figures, a birdman dressed in black and white, and a double-headed birdman who, like the Roman god of doorways, sees the world two ways, within and without, as one. Here is a lion man, or lioness woman, carved around 40,000 years ago, a time when Neanderthals still existed. Currently the oldest known sculpture, it inspired a recent carving of mine, dancing in time 40,000 years. The 40,000-year-old Lion Man is an indication of just how deeply holistic perception and creative imagination are embedded in the human psyche. Neuropsychologists are now using functional MRI scanners to view how we use very different mental processes to make sense of ourself and the world in which we live. This diagram shows the two halves of the brain and describes their unique functions. To solve most problems, we tend to use left hemisphere thinking, verbal, analytic, rational thought, logic, and planning. However, when trying to make sense of who we are in relation to the world, we prioritize right hemisphere mental faculties, holistic perception, intuitive, non-verbal, emotional thought, and creative imagination. The left hemisphere may be good at very basic analysis, for example, simple arithmetic, but needs input from the right hemisphere when carrying out more complex forms of reasoning. In other words, there is a major difference between the sort of knowledge available from logic and language and the sort available from more holistic forms of thinking. There is a helpful analogy to describe the difference between logical, verbal, analytic thinking and holistic thought. If you shine a torch into a dark room, you will see only one or two things at a time. If you carry a lantern, you will illuminate everything and yourself as part of the room. Research has shown that before the age of 18 months, a child does not have a sense of self. However, with a sense of a separate self, plus the development of thinking and language, we learn to separate ourselves from the rest of the world, a skill that's both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it brings huge benefits: analytic thinking, planning, basic mathematics, science, medicine, technology, engineering, and so on. A curse because it also creates a sense of division between the self and everything else. This does not seem to be a problem in more primitive cultures. For example, if we ask someone in our culture, "Where is your consciousness? Where are you?" they will usually point to their head or their body. However, when the actor and playwright Simon McBurney put these questions to an isolated tribe in the Amazon rainforest, he found, quote, "They very simply put their arms towards the forest." Similar cultural differences exist between Western and East Asian cultures. If a photograph is shown of an individual standing at the center of a complex scene, Westerners tend to focus on the figure and are less accurate than East Asians at recalling the overall setting. As Robert Sapolsky points out, Westerners process information in a more focused manner, East Asians in a more holistic one. In Western cultures, we see ourselves as both different and separate from the world. Yet, feeling different is not separate. To challenge rigid beliefs and set ways of thinking, Zen masters often employ semantic puzzles such as, "Where is my lap when I stand up?" and "Where is my fist when I open my hand?" We may be unique and different, like fingers and thumb, but not a separate manifestation of the oneness that is the whole hand. Take the Chinese folk tale of Monkey, an arrogant, self-obsessed trickster figure who, with his companions, is in search of enlightenment. One day, he brags to the others that he can travel to the end of the universe. When he does so, he confronts 5 golden pillars. Never one to miss a chance for self-recognition, Monkey immediately carves his name into one of the pillars. The journey has taken a long time, and he also feels the need to relieve himself. At that moment, he has a sudden awakening. Monkey realizes he's pissing on the hand holding the whole universe. He now understands that no matter how far he travels, he is always part of something greater than his self, and he is forever connected to the creative source of everything. By seeing deeply into the true nature of things, Zen recognized something very important. The self is not a separate thing, but has always been part of, or interconnected with, everything else. In Zen, the self is seen as a part of an ever-changing, interwoven state of being, or oneness, part of the way and into being. These terms, the way and into being, or self-world oneness, explain and give meaning to the questions, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? By forgetting the concept of a separate self, we see into our true nature. We see that we are part of everything else, all living creation and the evolving world. To quote Dogen Zenji in full, "The study of the way is the study of the self. The study of the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all myriad things." Awakened by all myriad things. The self and world are one, and you are dancing at the source of being.